The sun hadn't yet breached the eastern ridge of the Blue Ridge Mountains when Ezra Callahan stepped out onto the creaking porch of his weathered farmhouse, a chipped enamel mug of black coffee warming his callous hands. The air was crisp with the scent of dew-damp earth and distant pine, the kind of morning that used to make him smile. But not today. Not anymore. Because parked right across the access road to his lower pasture, again, was the same white SUV with the fake insignia and the smug, oversized antenna that had become the bane of his existence. It sat there like a stone in his boot, an intrusion as unwelcome as a rattlesnake in the hayloft. The vehicle belonged to Brenda Whitmore, or at least that's what the laminated badge said. She called herself an HOA compliance officer, though Ezra had never signed up for any homeowners association, didn't live in a subdivision, and sure as hell didn't live near any neighbors within 10 miles, let alone enough to form a damn association. And yet, here she was, every morning, like clockwork, blocking the gate that led to the south meadow where his herd of black Angus grazed. Ezra wasn't a man of many words, but he had a quiet fury that ran deep, like the river that cut to the back of his property. He'd lived on this land for over 50 years, inherited it from his father, who'd gotten it from his father before him. The Callahans didn't own much in the way of luxuries. No fancy cars, no smart TVs, no vacations to tropical islands. But they owned their land, free and clear, deed in hand, taxes paid on time, rain or shine. So when this woman started showing up 2 months ago, flashing a badge that looked like it came from a Halloween costume store, and citing bylaws Ezra had never seen, let alone agreed to, he knew something was off. The first time he'd tried reason. "Ma'am," he'd said, standing tall at 6'2", his silver-streaked hair tucked under a faded John Deere cap. "You're on private property. This is Callahan Ranch. There's no HOA here. Now, if you don't mind, I need to get the tractor through to check on the south pasture." She'd smirked, arms crossed, standing beside her SUV like a traffic cop who'd finally found someone to ticket. "Actually, Mr. Callahan, your property falls under the jurisdiction of the Whispering Pines Covenant Association. You were grandfathered in during the initial registration, but noncompliance results in penalties, parking violations, obstruction of community access routes." "Community access routes?" Ezra had interrupted, voice low. "Lady, the nearest house is 10 miles down County Road 17. There's no community. There's no pine whispering. And there's no access route, but the one I built myself in 73 with a Caterpillar and a pack of Marlboros." She just smiled that cold, practiced smile and said, "Well, things have changed. The association has expanded its reach. You'll receive a notice in the mail." And she'd left. For a day. Then she came back. And the next day. And the next. Soon, it wasn't just about the gate. It was about aesthetic violations. His rusted windmill, the clothesline, the fact that his barn wasn't painted the approved colonial white. She issued fines, $2.50 here, $500 there, piling up like dead leaves in a gutter. Ezra ignored them. He wasn't about to pay some fandom organization for the privilege of living on his own land. But Brenda didn't stop. She escalated. She started parking her SUV across the access road every single morning, sometimes leaving it there for hours. She'd take photos with her phone, scribble notes on a clipboard, and once, Ezra caught her trying to tape a yellow violation notice to his front door. He tore it down and tossed it in the wood stove. The real problem wasn't the fines. It was the cattle. Ezra ran a modest herd, about 40 head of black Angus, bred for quality, raised on open pasture. He didn't use feedlots, didn't pump them full of antibiotics. His cows grazed on native grasses, drank from the spring-fed creek, and moved freely across 320 acres of rolling hills and timber. But the south pasture, the lush, fertile one with the best grass, was cut off by that gate, and when Brenda blocked it, the cattle couldn't rotate. They were forced to overgraze in Northfield, which was already thin from last summer's drought. He tried going around, but the terrain was rough, and the cattle weren't young. One of his oldest heifers, Bessie, had gone lame trying to navigate the rocky ravine. Another, a 2-year-old bull named Duke, had gotten tangled in barbed wire and gashed his shoulder. Ezra had spent a sleepless night stitching him up with vet suture and whiskey. And still, Brenda came. She'd sit in her SUV, sometimes with the windows down, blasting some pop music, eating a sandwich, watching him struggle with the gate, the cattle, the tractor. Once, she even laughed when he slipped in the mud, trying to pull a stuck wheelbarrow free. "You know," she called out, smirking, "if you kept your property up to code, you wouldn't have these issues." Ezra didn't answer. He just wiped the mud from his face and kept working. But something was changing inside him, a slow burn, a memory stirring, because Ezra Callahan wasn't just a rancher. He was a man who'd spent 23 years hauling freight on the Norfolk Southern line, working as a brakeman, and later an engineer on the coal trains that rumbled through the Appalachian passes. He knew weight. He knew tension. He knew how to rig a chain, how to winch a load, how to move something 10 tons with nothing but leverage and steel. And he remembered the day he'd use a 30-foot chain and a diesel-powered winch to drag a derailed hopper car back onto the rails after a landslide. The crew had said it couldn't be done. Ezra had said, "Watch me." He hadn't touched those skills in years. Not since he retired from the rails and came back to the ranch full-time after his wife, Clara, passed. But now, as he stood on the porch, watching that white SUV block his gate again, something clicked. He set the coffee mug down, walked into the barn, and opened the old steel locker in the back. Inside, covered in dust but still strong with the chains. Thick, heavy military grade. 40 feet of interlock steel links, rated for 20,000 pounds. He'd use them to secure loads on flatbeds, to anchor equipment during storms, to pull stumps from the ground. He ran his hand along the cold metal, feeling the weight of memory. Then he found the winch, mounted on the front of his old John Deere 4440 tractor. He hadn't used it in years, but he knew it still ran. He kept the tractor in near-perfect condition. Oil changed, filters replaced, battery charged. It was a beast of a machine, with a diesel roar that could wake the dead. He also found the toe straps, the heavy-duty hooks, the gloves, and then, in a wooden box on the top shelf, wrapped in oilcloth, he found his railroad hat. Not the kind conductors wore, but the kind brakemen wore. Dark blue, with a brass badge. He'd worn it every day for over 2 decades. He put it on, looked at himself in the dusty mirror on the back of the barn door. The man staring back wasn't old. Not really. 73, yes, but his shoulders were broad, his arms thick with muscle earned from decades of hard labor. His eyes, pale blue like winter sky, were sharp, focused. He wasn't going to fight fire with fire. He was going to fight steel with steel. That morning, Brenda Whitmore arrived at 7:15 a.m., right on schedule. She wore her usual outfit, khaki pants, a polo shirt with a fake HOA logo, a pine tree inside a circle, with the words Whispering Pines Covenant Association beneath it, and those shiny black shoes that looked like they'd never seen real dirt. She parked her SUV across the gate, got out, stretched like she owned the place, and reached into the back seat for her clipboard. She didn't see Ezra at first. He was in the barn, checking the tractor's fuel level, testing the winch motor. It sparked to life with a deep, throaty hum. The chain fed smoothly through the drum. Then he started the tractor. The engine roared, loud enough to shake the bird from the trees. Brenda turned, startled. She saw the tractor rolling out of the barn. Ezra at the controls, his face shadowed by the brim of that old railroad hat. She frowned, then forced a smile. "Mr. Callahan, we meet again. I see you're working." Ezra didn't answer. He drove straight toward her. She stepped in front of the SUV, hands on hips. "You can't pass here. This is a compliance zone. You're in violation of..." He stopped the tractor 10 feet away, killed the engine, got down slowly, deliberately, walked to the front of the tractor, unhooked the winch cable, let it drape on the ground like a serpent. Brenda's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" Ezra looked at her. Calm, cold. "You've been blocking my gate for 53 days. "That's not accurate," she said, flipping through her clipboard. "It's been 49. I missed 3 days due to administrative leave." 53, Ezra said. "I've been counting." She laughed nervously. "Well, I'm just doing my job." Enforcing community standards. There is no community, Ezra said. There's no association. There's no authority you have here. That's not true, she said, voice rising. We have legal jurisdiction. The county recognizes. No, Ezra interrupted. They don't. I checked, spoke to the clerk, spoke to the sheriff. There's no record of any HOA covering this area. No filings, no bylaws, no tax ID, nothing. Brenda froze. Her face went tight. You have no right to investigate me. I have every right, Ezra said. This is my land, my cattle, my life, and you've been starving my herd, blocking my access, threatening me with fines from a fake organization. She took a step back. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough, Ezra said, and I know what you're doing. You're part of a scam, a fraud. You and your little fake badge and your clipboard full of lies. You target people like me, older, isolated, not likely to fight back. You scare them into paying. Or you harass them until they sell. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Ezra pointed at the SUV. That vehicle, it's not registered to any HOA. It's registered to a shell company in Delaware. Pineview Management, LLC. Never heard of it. No business license in this county. No insurance for commercial enforcement work. Just a van, a badge, and a lot of nerve. You can't prove that, she snapped. I already did, Ezra said. Called the DMV. Ran the VIN. Talked to a friend at the state attorney's office. They're looking into it. Her face paled. Ezra stepped forward. But I'm not calling the cops today. She blinked. What? I'm not calling them, he repeated. Because today, I'm handling this the old-fashioned way. He picked up the chain, laid it across the hood of her SUV. You're trespassing, she said, voice trembling. If you damage my vehicle, I'll sue you. Ezra knelt, attached the chain to the front tow hitch of the tractor with a heavy-duty shackle. Then he walked the SUV, opened the front bumper panel, and hooked the other end of the frame. The chain went taut. Brenda stared, eyes wide. You can't do this. Ezra climbed back onto the tractor, started the engine. The winch engaged. The chain groaned. The SUV's tires dug into the dirt. No, Brenda screamed. Stop. This is assault. This is... Ezra shifted into low gear, pulled forward. Slowly, deliberately, the chain tightened. The SUV lurched. One tire lifted off the ground. Brenda ran around, trying to get in, but the doors were locked. Ezra had triggered the remote lock with a button on the tractor. He kept pulling. The SUV skidded sideways, then forward, dragged by the relentless power of the John Deere. Ezra guided it off the access road, down the slope toward the creek. Brenda followed, shouting, crying, threatening to call the police. Ezra didn't look back. He reached the edge of the shallow creek, wide, rocky, fed by mountain springs. The water wasn't deep, maybe 2 feet in the center, but the current was strong, and the bottom was slick with moss-covered stones. He stopped the tractor, let the chain hang. Then, with a flick of a lever, he released the winch. The SUV rolled forward, tires spinning in the air, and splashed into the water with a heavy crash. It settled sideways, front end half submerged. Radio still playing some pop song, now muffled by the rush of water. Brenda stood on the bank, screaming, You maniac! You ruined my vehicle. I'll have you arrested. You'll go to prison. Ezra shut off the tractor, climbed down, walked to the bank, looked at her, then looked at the SUV, water lapping at the driver's side window. I didn't ruin it, he said calmly. I relocated it, just like you've been relocating my access. Just like you've been moving my life around like I don't matter. She was crying now. You're insane. No, Ezra said. I'm done being pushed around. He turned and walked back to the gate, unlatched it, swung it open. The cattle, gathered at the edge of the north pasture, lifted their heads. Some began moving toward the south field, drawn by the scent of fresh grass. Ezra watched them go. Then he walked to the barn, got a shovel, and began digging a hole near the gate. Brenda, soaked from wading into the creek, to try to push her SUV out, stumbled back to the bank. "What are you doing now?" "Planting," Ezra said. "A flag?" "No," he said. "A post, with a sign." He placed a wooden plank in the hole, hand-carved, freshly painted. It read, "Callahan Ranch, private property. No trespassing. No HOA. No warning." He tamped the dirt down hard. Then he went back to the tractor, backed it up, and hooked a plow to the three-point hitch. He spent the rest of the day working the south field, turning the soil, preparing it for new grass seed he'd ordered. The cattle grazed peacefully. The sun warmed the land. Brenda finally gave up trying to free her SUV. She trudged up the road to where her phone had signal and called a tow truck, but she didn't call the police. Not that day. 3 days later, the story broke. Not because Ezra told anyone, but because a hiker passing to the nearby national forest had seen the SUV in the creek. He'd taken a photo, Brenda screaming, the tractor in the background, the sign freshly planted, and posted online with a caption, "Old rancher defends his land from fake HOA cop. Respect." It went viral. Within hours, local news picked it up. Then regional. Then national. Rancher versus fraudulent HOA officer. Viral video shows epic retribution. Fake HOA scam exposed after elderly farmer drags SUV into creek. 73-year-old ex-train engineer takes down fake compliance officer with tractor and chains. Reporters showed up at Ezra's gate. Cameras, microphones, drones buzzing overhead. He didn't talk to them. He stood on his porch, shovel in hand, and said, "I've got work to do. Come back when you're ready to help me plow." But the damage was done for Brenda. The state attorney general launched an investigation. Whispering Pines Covenant Association didn't exist. No such entity was registered. The shell company in Delaware was tied to a man in Florida with a history of fraud. Brenda Whitmore had a record, minor, but their forgery impersonating an official, unauthorized towing. She was arrested a week later. Turned out she was part of a larger scam. Fake HOA officers targeting rural landowners, especially elderly ones, using intimidation and bogus fines to extort money. Some paid. Some sold their land just to make it stop. Ezra wasn't the first, but he was the first to fight back. And he'd done it in a way no one could ignore. The county sheriff, a man named Roy Griggs, who'd known Ezra since he was a boy, visited the ranch one evening. He found Ezra on the porch, whittling a piece of pine into the shape of a horse. Sheriff Griggs took off his hat. "You know, Ezra, dragging someone's vehicle into a creek is technically illegal." Ezra didn't look up. "Technically." Griggs sighed. "We got your statement. We got the DMV records. We got the video. She was trespassing, harassing you, threatening your livelihood, and she had no authority." Ezra nodded. "So," Griggs said, "I'm not filing charges, and neither is the DA. Consider it community justice." Ezra finally looked up. "I didn't do it for justice. I did it so my cows could eat." Griggs smiled. "Well, they're eating now." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the hills. Finally, Griggs said, "You ever think about writing a book? Or doing interviews? People want to hear your story." Ezra shook his head. "I've said all I need to say." "But you stood up," Griggs said, "to a system that preys on people like you. You exposed the fraud. You inspired half the county." Ezra stood, stretched. "I didn't stand up. I just opened a gate." He walked toward the barn, the old railroad hat still on his head. And as the stars began to pierce the twilight, the cattle lowed softly in the south pasture, full, content, finally free to roam. Ezra Callahan had won, not with lawyers, not with guns, but with chains, a tractor, and quiet, unbreakable will of a man who knew the way to steal and the value of his land.